whether it's just basically the cartels are like an extra military force, right? But there are also conditions that allow these organizations to flourish to some degree. And there's a lot of intervention that's required kind of from the United States because we have skin in the game because the stuff is coming into our country and killing our citizens as well. But it's the people who live in Mexico that really are suffering, under the boots of these brutal people being killed and being subject to, terror and violence in the streets every day.
History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
For those not familiar, CJNG refers to the incredibly brutal and violent Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a drug cartel that controls much of the shipment of fentanyl, actually, which is its own story. The fact that so much of that stuff is flooding into the U.S. and being pressed into counterfeit, opioid pills being sold in the street and killing people dead because the stuff, could kill an elephant with like a couple of grains. I mean, it's absolutely deadly, incredibly potent, and being mixed with stuff and people are not aware and then they're taking it and overdosing. Thankfully, there are ways of reversing it using naloxone and other kind of like emergency injections. I believe it can be sniffed and it can bring somebody out of one of these states of an overdose. But this is the cartel that is largely responsible for that stuff coming into the United States. The police official in question is named Severo Flores Mendoza, who was the police chief of the police force in a very rural part of western Jalisco, which is, of course, the J in CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. And it is the base of their operations. And the fact that it's rural means that they're sort of, off the beaten path, able to kind of operate in isolation to a large degree. So it would make sense that they would be interested in having high-ranking members of the police force in that part of the country in their pocket, on their payroll. And that is, in fact, what the U.S. is alleging. That Flores Mendoza, quote, provides law enforcement information to CJNG in exchange for bribes. I guess you could say that organized bribes over a period of time is essentially just drawing a paycheck. It's not like little handshake deals here and there being passed a couple bucks. This guy is being accused of very much being an important component of this operation. So there's a town called Amisa, which is officially where Flores Mendoza was the police chief, but it's in a particularly, rural area of Jalisco off of a main drag that connects the resort town of Puerto Vallarta, which you may have heard of, popular tourist destination, to the state capital of Guadalajara. He also has some other duties and apparently is the coordinator of other police chiefs in the region. That includes that town of Amisa and 13 other municipalities. So this guy is a real mover and shaker in terms of like his influence over a vast network of law enforcement officials in that part of the country. So there's a gentleman by the name of, and gentleman is probably giving him too much credit, Nemesio Esguerra Cervantes, a.k.a. El Mencho, who is the top dog, the top boss of CJNG. And he is alleged to be hiding out somewhere in an inland region between those two larger cities that we mentioned. There is a $10 million reward out for information leading to his capture. And understandably, I suppose, maybe not, I don't know, the Amisa Police Department is not commenting on the state of this relationship. Florence Mendoza, though, has been put on some sort of departmental leave, not necessarily fired, but it says that he's no longer serving in his position as police chief. But there was no further information or comment regarding, the whole investigation. The Treasury press release, the U.S. Treasury press release, is pretty vague as well. Doesn't really explain what role Mexico is playing in cooperation, regarding these sanctions, that, could potentially affect, these sanctions. And it's also unclear whether there are any Mexican law enforcement entities that have, in fact, issued arrest warrants for the police chief. So it's a lot of kind of cloak and dagger around the whole thing. But what we do know is that in addition to Florence Mendoza, the U.S. Treasury Department is also sanctioning 5 other individuals for alleged associations with the cartel, including a Julio Cesar Montero Pincion, a.k.a. El Tarjetas, who is accused of being one of the top bosses of CNG in Puerto Vallarta, which is that resort town that we talked about. He is also accused of masterminding an incredibly brutal and just open attempt on the life of one of Mexico's top security officials, a guy by the name of Omar Garcia Harfuk, and that was in June of 2020. He was attacked in broad daylight by essentially what feels like almost like a SWAT team, high-powered artillery, in a very high traffic area in Mexico City. Again, broad daylight, early in the morning. This official was not killed. He was badly injured, and he survived, and he actually remains in that job to this day. Some other folks are other family members of the former CJNG captain Saul Alejandro Rincion Godoy, referred to as El Chopa, not to be confused with El Chapo. And they claim that he acted as the intermediary between CJNG leader El Mencho, who we referred to earlier, and senior cartel members. And this gentleman, El Chopa, was killed in a firefight with Mexican authorities there in Puerto Vallarta back in April. And the U.S. Treasury also sanctioned 4 of his family members for their potential involvement in helping El Chopa, act as a kind of bulldog in supporting the work of El Mencho.
Question. I got a question.
Yeah.
Did you read the reports about Cervantes? They date back to February of this year, saying that El Mencho, actually died in a private hospital in Guadalajara. Have the police issued anything about that?
I didn't see any reports of his death, but it's certainly possible, and it could even be the kind of thing that they would want people to think. But I don't know, right. Ben. That's news to me.
Well, I just really quickly want to. That would be crazy if that dude actually passed away, right? Or that was a cover story to get him to go into hiding. What? A nickname like El Mencho?
I want a cool nickname. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can't become a brutal cartel drug lord. It's not out of your grasp.
Thanks, man. But what were you saying, Matt?
Oh, well, just wanted to. Just if you're gonna take out somebody that high level, who was the guy's name? Harfuk. The person who was attacked by essentially a SWAT team. It feels like someone that high level in any kind of security force, you would need to have good intel. Someone on the inside or someone who's aware of the travels of that person, unless you are specifically watching that person every day and just watching for, patterns of which way this person goes home. And maybe just even a tracker on a vehicle or something. But to me, having intel that's very close to high levels of security, like this person we're talking about, right? The chief of police who was also wrangling all of the chiefs of police in some way,
right?
Seems like a smart person to corrupt, I guess, or just get on your side.
Absolutely. He.
It just feels like I wonder how much of it is connected, and what other kind of attacks are connected to intel that this person could have given.
I'd say many, because it's these flavors of corruption are kind of like they're crockpot corruption. It takes it goes in. It's not fast food corruption. You know what I mean? It's not an impulse decision to provide intel or to start moonlighting. It is a slow relationship that builds and accretes over time. And sometimes it happens such that to your point about intel, Matt, a deep cover informant, might end up getting just so morally blurred that they're not sure how much they're doing it counts as actual informant work versus, oh crap, now I'm a criminal straight up.
Or I'm just protecting my family at this point.
Right, exactly. And we can't underestimate the cartels have tremendous reach. They're incredibly dangerous.
That's right. I mean, it could be seen as a move of self-preservation to a degree, because the cartels kill police regularly. I mean, there really is nothing that's off limits to cartel leaders. I mean, it's just an absolute terrifying situation. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, a lot of the police force, especially I could imagine in these more rural areas where the cartels operate, this one in particular, probably pretty understaffed. What are they going to go to war with the cartel and say, no, you can't do this? I mean, it's not realistic. It's not logistically feasible.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think I mentioned this in earlier strange news segments. The reality of the situation is, for anyone who doesn't know the extent of how dangerous parts of the region become, the reality of the situation is that in some cases, cartels are doing things that would ordinarily be activities of a state level power.
That's right.
That's how deep it is.
And they finance. They essentially can act as charity or as support for citizens. In an effort to kind of either keep them quiet or to make them terrified, like it's a form of protection. But we've heard about people like Pablo Escobar being viewed as like a saint, because he provided schools and infrastructure in places that weren't getting that kind of care, weren't getting that kind of attention. So it is a fine line. And again, I hope nobody thinks that I'm being an apologist for police corruption or we don't know the details of what this Flores Mendoza actually did. But I think it's important to look at all the sides and what a dangerous situation this is and how you might feel completely hamstrung to actually do anything about it. And maybe it's just easier and safer for you and your family just to turn the other cheek, or even maybe it's a slippery slope. And then all of a sudden, like you said, Ben, you're providing information at gunpoint. And then before you know it, it's like, well, now you're getting paid for it. And that becomes another kind of ball of wax.
Yeah. Yeah, it's dangerous times. And of course, one thing that I think a lot of U.S. media misses when they report about these stories is that Mexico is awesome. It's an awesome culture. It's a beautiful place. There are so many like invaluable historical parts of the human story that are located in Mexico. We shouldn't think of it. No one should think of it entirely as like a Mad Max land ruled by cartels. So don't give up on them. But yeah, it is very bad. And this is a question I have for you, Noel. How common, because I 100% agree with your point about the cartels being able to outpower law enforcement. So how common do you think it is for this sort of corruption to exist? Would you say it's...
I'm sure. I think we'd all agree it's very common. And we know it happens at the highest levels. And in these more rural areas, to me, it seems almost more like a situation where it would be, under duress to a degree, because like, what can you do? Your choices are either to play ball or have your family murdered, because nothing is off the table. But we also know that politicians in Mexico, historically, there has been evidence of corruption, at the highest levels. There are obviously certain things in this country, whether it's just basically the cartels are like an extra military force, right? But there are also conditions that allow these organizations to flourish to some degree. And there's a lot of intervention that's required kind of from the United States, because we have skin in the game, because the stuff is coming into our country and killing our citizens as well. But it's the people who live in Mexico that really are suffering, under the boots of these brutal people being killed and being subject to, terror and violence in the streets every day. And this isn't to say that people go to Mexico City and they have a lovely time and there's beautiful culture there, but you also could get swept up in a broad daylight assassination attempt. Not to say that those kinds of shootings don't happen here too. It's dangerous everywhere, but it's a difficult situation, I think, is what we're all saying.